many people are tangled in their own trauma story. They can pass it from one generation to another. Not only the physical wounds, but the invisible wounds and scars that people are still struggling with.
Thanks for tuning in to the Coffee with Karim podcast. Don't forget to leave us a lovely review on iTunes and sponsor the show today at patreon.com. Links are in every description of every show.
See people who go through traumatic experiences, they need three things. One, they need to have a voice.
Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Karim. I am your host, Karim Sirajuddin. Today I have Dr. Omar Reda calling in from Portland, Oregon. He is a psychiatrist. Dr. Omar, welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me, Brother Karim.
My pleasure, sir. The honor is mine. So, Dr. Omar, please tell us a little bit more about the nature of your work in psychiatry and why you chose to go into this field.
SubhanAllah, I was called into medicine at very early age. I was 6 years old when I lost my sister. She was 14 and she died of brain cancer. So the pain and suffering that I saw my parents go through, I decided to do something with the brain. So I thought I'm going to become a brain surgeon. And I did really well in medical school. And then every time I go to the operating room, I end up fainting. So I knew that surgery was not my cup of tea. So alhamdulillah, I was very attracted to emergency medicine. So I worked as an ER physician for about 3 years in Libya. And eventually, subhanAllah, even in the ER, I found that I was attracted to people's stories and I was, tending to their emotional needs. And I knew psychiatry was the true calling, but, there is lots of stigma in the Muslim community when it comes to being a psychiatrist. But alhamdulillah, when I came to the United States, I found a position in the University of Tennessee in Memphis. I think that's the best decision in my life. I love the field of psychiatry. I think it's the most beautiful field of medicine because we mend broken hearts.
SubhanAllah. So you knew from a young age that you were going to be a person that helps others. Now, why do you think that psychiatry, psychology, there's still... we know why there is a stigma amongst the Muslims, but do you think a part of that reason is because we are ignorant of, let's say, our own history and the Islamic civilizations? Because if you're a history, nerd, and you read about Islamic history, you're going to see that this wasn't something that was, it began with Freud, essentially.
Yeah, that's true. There is lots of, reference in the Quran, the Sunnah to emotional needs, and Rasulullah was highly encouraging of counseling. He was the best counselor, Every time he goes to the masjid and see people going through a rough time, he would sit down with them. And he is the one who said, if you ease your brothers or sisters' suffering, then Allah will ease the suffering for you. And, the Quran is very, very clear when Prophet, Yaqub alayhi salam, he lost his eyesight because he was grieving Yusuf alayhi salam. When Sayyidah Maryam, she was going through lots of depression because she was accused of, having Isa alayhi salam. And we know how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not reprimand her for having feelings. He actually gave her the remedy to go through that difficult time. He said, Kuli washrabi wa qarri ayna. And then he said, فَإِمَّا تَرَيِنَّ مِنَ الْبَشَرِ أَحَدًا فَقُولِي إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لِلرَّحْمَنِ صَوْمًا فَلَنْ أُكَلِّمَ الْيَوْمَ إِنسِيًّا. He said, you have to take care of yourself through eating healthy and good hydration and sleeping healthy. Yeah, self-care is very important in Islam. And we know how Sayyidah Musa alayhi salam, when she lost her son, even though it was very brief, departure, she أصبح فؤادها فارغا, basically. Her heart was empty because when a parent loses their children, it's a very, very difficult thing. So Quran is very full of these very beautiful encounters that the prophets and the righteous people had. So I think there is a loss of stigma because of the culture, not because of the religion. And unfortunately, we are kind of enemies for what we don't know. Psychiatry, so far, we don't have like X-ray that will show that you're diagnosed with schizophrenia or bipolar or going through PTSD or ADHD. We don't have a specific and exact, diagnostic testing. So we rely on criteria. You have to meet certain number of criteria to be given a certain diagnosis. But alhamdulillah, there is lots of development in the field of psychiatry and the field of Islamic psychology that I'm very excited about.
Absolutely. Myself as well. I mean, I knew I wanted to study psychology since I was 16 years old. I'm almost 40 now. And just to see where our community has come, I mean, I'm not a special guy, but I just remember being on that forefront at Masajid, since I was 20 years old, bringing concepts of psychology or mental health to the my own Muslim community, right, that I grew up in, and I taught at the schools, etc. And then later, I started to discover this actual field of ilm al-nafs and psychology, right? Like once I started to do more research in college and then, of course, grad school, it was like, wow, we have this tradition. It just, is untapped in a lot of ways. And so it was a real big opening to just see that this tradition is so alive in the text and the literature, but we're not quite living it, right, fully. But, in your case, you had a very profound existential experience with the passing of your sister, rahimahullah. And this was the kind of, I want to say, alarm or something that made you go, you probably asked a lot of questions then, right? And I'm wondering, how did you reconcile your faith in Allah and trust in Allah going through such a traumatic experience of losing a loved one, and then use that charge to want to do something, useful with it? What was your experience then, if you don't mind me, tapping into that a little?
Yeah, I mean, subhanAllah, losing my sister Zakiya, may Allah inshallah bless her soul, was one of the very early memories, but I have many, many other, traumatic experiences because, I ended up leaving my home country of Libya, becoming an asylum seeker because I was placed on the blacklist of the regime because of my humanitarian and social activities. So living in exile away from your parents was a very difficult experience, going through discrimination and people looking at you as if you are the enemy, even though you are running from dark ideologies. Now you are being looked as if you are part of extremist groups or whatever it is. So, and unfortunately, I mean, the timing was also very difficult for me. When I came to the United States, I came in 2002. So it was basically immediately after 9/11, and America was going through lots of grief. And some people, they show their grief through anger and through, just dehumanizing the other and looking at people with suspicion. So alhamdulillah, I mean, going through some of that, I decided to specialize in the field of disaster relief. So I was responsible for the disaster relief section in the University of Tennessee, and actually for a big part of the state of Tennessee. And then when I moved to Oregon, the same happened. I became very involved in, working with traumatized population. But then the Arab Spring happened, and, one of the countries was my own home city of Benghazi, Libya. Ended up losing loved ones, ended up having very difficult conversations with my mom. She thought, subhanAllah, the whole family will die for genocide, and I had to struggle with nightmares and my own PTSD, thinking that I'm losing my family. Alhamdulillah, most of them are still alive. I recently lost my mom. May Allah inshallah have mercy on her.
Ameen.
But all of these experiences made me just realize that, subhanAllah, Allah gave me a gift that I need to do zakat al-ilm. I need to share my knowledge, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ, not only your money, but also your time and your knowledge. And I'm very committed to this project, alhamdulillah, which is working with the people who have no voice and try to speak up for them.
Subhanallah. Mashallah, I mean, all the stuff you've been through, I can't imagine carrying that pain and that weight and reconciling, making meaning of it, and also still using that, energy, if you want to call it that, to still do something khair, right? Because I find that people who experience evil, there's a variety of responses that can happen. And often it is, I'm going to become the evil. It's almost like a twisted coping mechanism. Like if I was bullied or abused, I become the bully or the abuser or the racist, because that's one of the ways I feel like it can't happen to me. I'm now the one who's doing. In other cases, the person could shut down and just kind of live in this dysfunction and all their complexes and try to kind of slide through life, right? And never really do anything about it, you know? And then there's the people who, you know, take that evil and recognize the meaning of it happening is not a personal slight from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's circumstantial and it's evil done by others, you know, because that's part of the package. People can choose to do whatever they want. You, me, and everyone around us, and sometimes we get the damage of that, right? And so, but then there's those people like yourself, sir, that take this experience and say, this is the lesson of life, and this is how you were able to find your meaning and purpose to go bring the good to replace that evil, because essentially evil is absence of good, right? And there's a variation of that good or that khair or that benefit or you know, healing to, you know, oppose that harm or that danger or that evil that's happening. So all the stuff that you went through, you were still able to hold on to your identity, your purpose, and your deen and your faith. I mean, I'm really humbled because just the things you've said, and I remember hearing you speaking at conferences about your experiences in more detail, and it was just like, wow, subhanAllah, and here you are, you know, still doing what you're doing and giving and helping those who've gone through it as well, which perhaps is one of the benefits or wisdom of going through a specific type of trauma or evil is, I understand and now I know how to help others cope and get through this too, which is why evil perhaps is part of, you know, embedded in the exam of the dunya perhaps. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, subhanallah, and you said it very eloquently, mashallah. I mean, we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you know, وَعَسَى أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا يَجْعَلْ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. So sometimes there is lots of good in something that seems evil, or we don't, you know, appreciate the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until we actually go through an experience like this. But I mean, there are many people who decide, rather than me being a victim, let me become a survivor. And others who will say, I will move from surviving to thriving, and I become a healer. And you said it very beautifully, mashallah. I mean, there are people who, they live in a dysfunction because of their trauma story. And some of them, they repeat the cycle. That's why I called my project Untangled. I wanted to break the cycle of dysfunction. Many people are tangled in their own trauma story. They can't pass it from one generation to another. But, subhanAllah, if you look at when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Mulk, He said, خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. The reason sometimes of death or we being tested with our own mortality is to do something very beautiful. أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Al-ihsan is something that's very elegant. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is expecting us out of our grief to do something productive for the community, for the society. And with the shootings in our brothers and sisters in New Zealand, I see how much good is coming out of that very evil terror, attack. But alhamdulillah, if you see people who go through traumatic experiences, they need three things. One, they need to have a voice. So making sure that their trauma story is acknowledged so they can make some kind of meaning out of their experience. The second thing, they need to try their best to make amends and maybe find forgiveness someday. And when I mean forgiveness, at least forgiving your own self. You don't carry that heavy weight of revenge or anger. If you are, mashallah, reaching maqam al-ihsan and you can forgive your, abuser, that's something that needs lots of discipline, and maybe you need to work with the professionals about that. I don't know if you remember the war in Libya. There are people who fought for and against the regime and eventually ended up sitting on the same table because there are, wounds and there are trauma stories on both sides of the conflict. So people will sit down together, they share their stories, they grieve together, and eventually they heal together. So finding meaning and finding amends and eventually finding closure. SubhanAllah, when my mom died, Allah yarhamha, in October 2016, I went through a very difficult time grieving because she was my best friend and because maybe I was away for many years in exile and stuff like that. Even though, alhamdulillah, I made a point, since the Arab Spring to try to go once a year and try to visit my parents. It took my grief process maybe 4 months. And then, subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me closure through seeing her in a very beautiful dream. She came and I was holding her, leg. And basically, I think it's just the interpretation. الجنة تحت أقدام الأمهات. Paradise is under the feet of your moms. And I was crying so hard, just holding it to her, because I knew she was leaving. And I heard somebody saying, ابكي أو لا تبكي فإن أمك صلت عليها الملائكة. It says, it doesn't matter if you cry or don't cry, your mom, her funeral was attended by the angels. And that gave me full closure. And if you know my mom, she's a very simple woman. She's not like famous or waliya min awliya Allah. But subhanallah, she always...
Who knows?
Yeah. She always was very loving and caring to everybody who comes across her way. She was very, very barra, taking care of her mom and dad, extremely too, like very, very, far extremes, mashallah. But alhamdulillah, when I found that closure, I decided to honor her memory, and I'm doing Project Untangled in her memory and the memory of my sister and many people that I lost across the... Yeah, and I think that's something we can do as healers. If we can use that, our own experiences for good, we can bring lots of good to our communities, inshallah.
I mean, I love these 3 steps that you gave us here. So we need 3 things to overcome trauma. And would this apply to lowercase t as well as uppercase t? Like a mild trauma versus a major trauma, right? Like everyone has some trauma, but not everyone has severe trauma, like what you've gone through, for example, in Libya, or the people who've gone through what they went through in those countries.
Yeah, that's an amazing question, because sometimes we see people who go through quote unquote, small trauma, but they are going through a very difficult time. Sometimes we see children, for example, in Palestine or in Syria, they're going through very protracted and long-term and very severe trauma, and they seem to be quite resilient. So it's not only the magnitude of the trauma, there are many other factors that play into who becomes resilient. And maybe you have a support system, maybe you have your faith, maybe you have a strong foundation of self-esteem, and maybe you have role models around you. And so there are many things that interplay, like biological aspects, psychological aspects, social and spiritual, that play into the healing process. But I think when it comes to large magnitude or big traumas, it will be nice, especially like in the Muslim community, to have this as a communal affair. Rasulullah, whenever there is a big incident, he will go to the minbar and he will basically announce that we are in this together. We are brothers and sisters, and we live as one ummah, truly one ummah, brotherhood and sisterhood. So when his cousin died, he said, "Isna'u li ali Ja'far ta'aman faqad ja'ahum al-yawma ma yashghaluhum." When somebody dies in the community, we go and take care of their families, take care of their children. Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, he told his brother Benjamin, he said, "Inni ana akhuka fala tabta'is." I am your brother, so don't worry. I have your back. You have my back. You're not going to grieve. You're not going to stress out, as long as we have each other. And this should be the attitude of the Muslim Ummah.
Ameen, ya Rab. So let me try to take some of the knowledge you've given us so far and try to get a case here. So let's say I take the 3 steps of what helps a person relieve themselves of trauma. Voice your story, make meaning of it. One of the things that I have found, the story of Adam alayhi salam, is what's so fascinating is the first thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did after he gave him ruh, right, which gave him life and awakened him, was allamahu al-asma. And he taught him meaning. He taught him, this is the technology of consciousness itself, right? Words, language, meaning. And without having meaning, there's no value or sense of reality, awareness, existence itself is that's the foundation of it, right? It's meaning. And this is why we need Allah, because that centralizes how we make meaning in this dunya sphere. So voicing and just naming your story, making meaning of it, is not, a lot of people might hear that and go, how is that going to help me who I've been raped, or I've had this happen or this happen? Can you tell us more about why that's such a intrinsic axiom of the human being, their healing, their capacity, and why naming something, giving it life through your words, like Adam was taught to do, and like we do constantly with objects and ideas and everything, has no meaning unless we give it meaning. So can you tell us a little bit more about your insight about that first step and how it could help with even some of these severe cases, just voicing your story or sharing, making meaning of something like this?
Yeah, subhanallah. And I think there is also a certain amount of humility that's needed, because when Iblis was tested the same way Prophet Adam was tested, he became very proud and arrogant, and he said, no, I'm not going to make meaning out of that test. And he decided to rebel against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we know the outcome was very different for him. But Yani, I can give you two examples. I mean, there are many, many more. But a few weeks ago, I have a 10-year-old who is a very happy child. So one day she was in very, very foul mood. She was giving me and her mom lots of attitude, which is not like her. So subhanAllah, we wanted to basically send her to her room for time out. And that's an old technique that we discourage in psychology. Now we don't do time outs anymore. We actually bring the child for a time in. So it took me lots of discipline to say, okay, let us go to your room, and Baba will go with you. And we sat down on the floor, and I said, this is a safe house. We have an open door policy. We're going to share our feelings. We don't hide our feelings from one another, especially scary and big feelings. And she started crying. She said, I had a nightmare last night that the whole family died in a flooding, So subhanAllah, she didn't have the voice. She has something stuck in her throat, which is her trauma story. And the minute I gave her that safety to express her emotions, she immediately started to share and became the happy child that she is. So this is on a small magnitude, if you like. And
so this is your daughter you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You and your wife seem like you have a lovely home, the safe house. You're, mashallah, an expert in what you do. You have a wonderful heart. Alhamdulillah, Allah bless you and your family. So why do you think your daughter was resistant to voice it in the first place if this was an environment that already invites this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there is lots of... It comes in different communities in a different, manifestation. For example, people who come from Western, cultures, usually they are about individualistic views. They will keep their secret. They are not going to share their trauma story because they think I can do it on my own. So they want to go through this, alone, and I am tough enough to, go through this tribulation. So that's one extreme of the spectrum. Another extreme, which is maybe the Eastern cultures, they seem to be more about the community and the family, and my decisions are based on the common good of the whole, society around me. So sometimes they keep the secret, or they don't share their trauma story because they don't want to be a burden. They say, I'm going to hide my suffering. I'm going to suffer in silence. I'm going to cry behind closed doors or cry myself to sleep because I don't want to be burdened on you. And, we are working parents, and they see how tired we are. And the children are very, very sensitive. They just want validation, and they want our unconditional love. And so sometimes they actually don't share, even though the house is safe enough for them. But I think it's an active process, an active investment. You have to maybe take your children on a date on a weekly basis and try to explore if there is something they haven't shared. And this is what I try to do. I mean, with the 3 daughters, alhamdulillah, I try my best to take them on individual dates.
I love that. That's actually one of the things that I dreamed about doing myself. I have a son and 2 twin girls, but they're fraternal, so it's like 2 different kids, mashallah. But I thought the same thing. I was like, when they get older, I have to have I thought to myself, I already have the plan. I'm like, every other Friday I'll go out with my son, then one Friday with one daughter and the other, and alternate the rotation so no one feels like someone always goes first and last every month, right? So I even thought it through to that extent, and I feel like I just got a nice validation when you're like, this is what I do, and it's very important because you give that personalized, custom safety and security for each child to be able to explore themselves with you without, sometimes, I don't want to say this in front of my brother or sister, or what if they make fun of me for it later? So it makes them more resistant and closed off. So I love that technique, and I'm really glad you brought that up. I think it's a great tip for everyone to consider for their own kids.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. I mean, I think for the fathers, I mean, some of dads in different cultures, they don't necessarily focus on the emotional needs of their children, especially their daughters. They don't show lots of affection, maybe because of cultural reasons. They don't actually, hug or touch or kiss their children. And this is very unfortunate because Rasulullah, I mean, when somebody saw him kissing his children, he said, I have 10 children. I never kissed any of them. And Rasulullah, he said, what can I do for you if there is no mercy in your heart? And another thing, I mean, we know until his death, every time he sees Sayyidah Fatima, he will stand up and give her a kiss on the forehead and make her sit in his spot, because this is how much he loved her and he loved her mom. So showing affection to our children and to our spouses is something that's very important, and there is nothing aib or haram in it. Actually, it's something that will bring lots of safety to the family. And I rather my children come and knock on my door 3 a.m. to share a dream or a nightmare than they go and Google it or go to a chat room and talk to strangers. And subhanAllah, we know many children are suffering in silence. I mean, sometimes we do a play and art therapy with the traumatized children, and I ask them what kind of animal maybe you like to be. And some of them say that I want to become a fish. And they say, okay, fish is very interesting. Why is that? And they say, because when I cry, nobody noticed. And subhanAllah, sometimes we underestimate how much children are going through. But Rasulullah was very, very attentive to that. I mean, whenever young Sahaba come, he will ask about their emotions today. How are you feeling? He will give them validation and give them empowerment. And they felt safe around him. They came and climbed on his shoulders. Right. I mean, my first book is called On the Shoulders of the Prophet, because this is how much they loved him and they felt valued and respected by him, والسلام. And everybody, I think, knows the famous story of the young Sahabi who came to the masjid and say, Ya Rasulullah, i'dhan li bizina. I just have very strong emotions. Give me permission to commit the big sin of fornication. And Rasulullah, rather than reprimanding him or kicking him out of the masjid to become a masjid dropout, he said, Udnu, just come closer. And he sat down with him until the young man felt very listened to. So we need to listen to our children and validate them and give them empowerment if we are to keep a healthy relationship and strong foundation, not only of Islamic knowledge, but also of self-esteem and safety.
Yeah. SubhanAllah, I mean, I feel like just all your sharing and, my own observations in this and some of the work I do, I almost feel like the axiom of reality, first and foremost, is this, trust and security, right? We need that developmentally as human beings, safety, predictability, then trust and security, then attachment and bonding. That's how you go from survive to thrive, right? And subhanAllah, the first relationship is the one with Allah, right? That's the central one. And that is where you need iman. And what does iman mean? Security and trust, right? And this is exactly what we need as human beings with each other. So it's like everything you're saying can almost be reduced in essence to we're creating security and trust, and that deepens the connection and the bonding and the attachment and the togetherness that requires our thriving as a species, as a community, as an ummah, as a family. Yeah. What are your thoughts about that, perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, many people were saying, what's the best way to actually work with traumatized individuals or even with hateful groups, like what happened with the New Zealand masjid. And subhanAllah, many people, they used to say the first step towards, eradicating ignorance is education. Just engage the other in the discussion so you don't alienate the alien. You will meet on common grounds and you meet in the middle and maybe humanize one another when you have a different perspective. But actually, more important than education, we found, is connection, the human connection. You go and sit inside the masjid and see what these people are about, or visit your Muslim neighbor, or anybody that you don't feel comfortable with. You actually go and sit with them, because the people who were disheveled in Mecca, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, وَلَا تَطْرُدِ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُم بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ. And he said, وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُم بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ. He told the Rasul, if you want to be successful, sit with the destitute and the poor and the needy and the orphans and the homeless. And this is what he did, alayhi salatu wasalam. So human connection is amazing. I wanted to share a very short story, which is about the Golden Gate Bridge. And this is a very famous bridge in California, not only because it's very beautiful, but also because this is a very attractive site for people to commit suicide. And this guy, he said, that day I decided to jump, but I just wanted to give people, another chance. He said, I just, decided for 20 minutes I'm going to walk back and forth along the bridge. And if one human kept an eye contact with me or gave me a smile or say, how's your day? Or why are you on the bridge? Or whatever human connection, he said, I will not jump. And he said for 20 minutes, everybody ignored me. Everybody is busy with their cell phones or with their own business. And he jumped and he survived. But it can be very powerful if you, smile or say salam or start a conversation with someone. You can not only save their self-esteem, you can literally save their lives.
SubhanAllah, hence why it's sunnah to smile, can be a sadaqah. And it's just so, it's so beautiful. The deen and other religions, of course, and common sense, good nature, it's in all of us. But it's just being, trying your best to be muhsin. In any opportunity you can is really the essence of how to practically live up to what you're telling us here, right? Human connection, intimacy, validation, awareness, acknowledgement. We also have to remember as Muslims that Allah chose everyone who exists right now to be here, right?
Yeah, and ihsan is something, subhanAllah, I'm glad you brought ihsan on, because it is the highest, status in our deen. But if you remember the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, when he was in the bottom of the well, basically he was muhsin. When he was in the prison, he was a muhsin. When he became the aziz, he became a muhsin. When his brother, they said, إِنَّكَ لَأَنْتَ يُوسُف, he said, أَنَا يُوسُف وَهَذَا أَخِي قَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا إِنَّهُ مَنْ يَتَّقِي وَيَصْبِرْ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. He said that the reason I became this elevated in status because of how beautiful my manners are. And he was not shaken by any test. It was the test of women or test of wealth or a test of, being away from his mom and dad or having his brothers betray him. So maqam al-ihsan is something that if we practice it, even during the very difficult time, because Allah said, خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. We practice ihsan even when we grieve. If we just, subhanAllah, examine our deen and follow the beautiful example of Muhammad ﷺ, we will be way, way ahead.
Now, why do you think the Prophet ﷺ, going back to one of the references you used of, be with the poor, the downtrodden, why didn't he say be with the powerful or the wealthy or the leaders of the why that? How is that going to help in our human connection, spirituality, and perhaps it's a training ground for the ihsan you were talking about? Can you tell us more about that meaning and how we can take more value from that?
There are many dynamics that interplay here. For example, if you go only with the rich and the famous, most likely you will have a sense of competition. You want to be like them, or you will not be satisfied. And al-qana'a, subhanAllah, is something, our deen will say, not only look for those who are above you in a materialistic, sense, but also look at the people who are less than you in a way. Because subhanAllah, we don't know in the eye of Allah, maybe the person that we don't recognize coming to the masjid, he might have a very, very high status. كم من معلوم في الأرض مجهول في السماء. There are people who are very famous on this earth, them in the high heaven, and vice versa. But also, subhanAllah, if you sit with the people who are struggling, you will have softness in your heart. One of the brothers, he said, I do lots of things that I enjoy, like hiking and maybe traveling, but I still have something missing in my heart. And I said, have you maybe volunteered with the refugees or going to the homeless shelters or going to children's hospital and And he said that he is going to try it, and subhanAllah, that brought softness to his heart. And we know every time we sit with people who are going through a rough time but still keep their faith, they are a source of inspiration for us. So if you sit only with the people who talk about dunya, you become attracted to dunya. But when you see people who are very, very happy and satisfied and have rida and qana'a, even though they have nothing, then alhamdulillah, you start to have a sense of peace and calmness coming to your heart.
Right. And that's like part of the value or benefit you get as a person who's, let's say, not as disenfranchised, but you're trying to support them. But also, there is, of course, the bigger picture, which is without the poor, the rich aren't tested with their wealth, right? And without the poor aren't tested with, let's say, their patience, or even sharing the little that they do have with each other, right? And so this is also part of it. It's like everyone's going to have a distribution of talents, provision, resources, and that's part of that test is, will you give to those that Allah did not will to have as much as you? Right? Will you go and teach and support those that Allah made this stuff come to you more easily, or it's, you know, a talent that you have? Will you go share that with others that it doesn't come as a talent, etc.? So do you feel like that's part of the point here too?
Absolutely. I mean, subhanAllah, the ulama, they had a debate about which one is better, al-ghani al-shakir or al-faqir al-sabir. They say that if somebody has lots of money and they are thankful and grateful and they spend it in the cause of Allah, are they better than somebody who has no money but they are very, you know, patient and they are grateful to Allah for having nothing but maybe having Allah still in their heart? So that dynamic absolutely plays into this relationship, and we see it you know, commonly. And subhanAllah, I've been working with the refugee community since 2011, and being an asylum seeker myself, an ex-refugee if you like, just that very, very humbling and humanizing experience, even though it has lots of pain and heartbreak. And when we become, alhamdulillah, blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we start to share, you know, our knowledge or our time or our talent, then that actually is very healing for us too. I mean, me sharing my stories and writing books is a way for me to have catharsis and heal my own PTSD. So it's not only altruism, it's also, you know, trying to make sense of very confusing world, if you like. They think sitting with people who are less fortunate gives you lots of solace and healing and meaning, even though you might not have the full picture of why people are suffering, or why children are dying, or why we are losing people for shooting, or why would somebody come inside the masjid and kill people while praying. I mean, still we find some kind of peace of mind when we, inshallah, sit down and try to do it as a community. Because I think, you know, trying to make sense of nonsense situation on your own can be very confusing. You might start to question the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You might become angry with the religion, or
you
blame.
could lose your mind. Yeah, a lot of things could happen. Again, that's evidence that we need each other, because we're social creatures. We're creatures of bonding. It's about, we're in this together, right? Only Allah is a samad. You know, I always tell people this. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a samad. He is the only one that's self-sufficient and needs nothing, and everyone and everything needs Him. We're the opposite. We constantly need, and we constantly are interconnected and need everything and everyone around us. I mean, think about it. We trust in so many processes and people on a daily basis. Just going out of your house every day and coming home, you're trusting that people are going to pay attention when they're driving too, so they don't run you over, or, you know, there's infinite things, right? This idea here that, you know, what came up for me as you were sharing about your catharsis with the PTSD and the work, and I love that, because as someone who has my own kind of hobbies with music and art as a catharsis for me, myself, I almost feel like the world, as you said, is very confusing unless we're not constructing powerful meaning throughout it, right? Or through it. And that can sometimes be intellectual. It can be artistic, like you were giving the example of the child, like just drawing a picture says it all. It could save you hours of therapy, right? And the importance of having art or different ways of therapeutic processes. Can you tell us more about the Untangled project? I love the name and I love the project. You got to check it out. It's projectuntangled.org. Dr. Omar, tell us more about this project.
Yeah, subhanAllah, it started as an idea in the middle of a war zone in Benghazi, Libya, in June of 2011. So we know the Arab Spring and the revolution in Libya started in February 2011, but the first few months, people were focused more on the physical needs, and everybody is facing actual death threats, and so the psychosocial needs were delayed. And we know that's very unfortunate because many people, they continue to suffer in silence, and most of the dysfunction we see now is because of the mental health consequences, not only the physical wounds but the invisible wounds and scars that people are still struggling with. And when I came to the US and work with refugees, I see this very same themes of dysfunction. There is lots of family breakdown. There is a misunderstanding between generations, and there are people repeating the trauma story. People are going from one dysfunction to another, maybe self-medicating, maybe domestic violence, maybe addiction, whatever it is. There are 5 different components of Untangled. One is to give people education, because many people, they think they maybe are losing it, or they are being crazy, or we normalize their experience. We say what happened to you is abnormal. What you are going through right now, your reactions are normal reaction to an abnormal situation. And we just give them explanation of what the trauma means and what's the normal reactions to trauma. And, we go through...
You help them make meaning.
Correct, yeah. Biologically, maybe there are hormones like norepinephrine and cortisol and other hormones that can be very beneficial on the short run. But if you are going through very chronic trauma, these hormones can cause high blood pressure, high blood sugar. They can cause ulcer, and they can have a very dangerous and even fatal consequences. So we do education through leaflets, the website, seminars, workshops. I write lots of books, as you know. So education is something that I'm very big on. Alhamdulillah, we do it on a monthly basis here in Portland. We meet as a community, and we have different theme. So education, we found out, people, they receive it very well because it's not very threatening. And sometimes we use words that are benign. They're not necessarily, I don't invite people to a psychosocial healing workshop. I just give it very, neutral and benign name, inviting name, like behind closed doors, or emotional safety. I would say stress management in Islam. So education is the first piece. The second one, of course, we cannot be a team of one. We train people, so there's lots of training that happens. So every community that we visit, they will have their own team that's trained, and they can carry this work. And this is a very specific training about trauma, how to listen to the trauma story with compassion, but also how to take care of yourself in the process, how to have the cultural humility while you are doing that, so you don't come across as the arrogant, I know it all, I am the expert kind of attitude, which is very, very harmful, that I see very commonly with the traumatized population. We fly to Syria or to Yemen, and I want to dictate my manual anew because it worked in Oregon. That means it has to work in, Aleppo or Aden or whatever. So subhanAllah, if we come with the attitude of humility, especially towards the culture and the religion, that's very, very helpful. And the third component, which has been the most successful one, is creation of safe spaces. So we provide safe spaces for the children, for the families, and we meet once a month, and we provide food or potluck, and people mingle socially, and then we very gently introduce a topic maybe that's difficult, maybe that's facing the community, maybe it's a taboo issue that children are dealing with, or we try to bring the children with their parents and do lots of family bonding through these activities, because most of the time we see each other as the enemy, even in a family context. Especially now teenagers, they are going through a rough time. They're learning the English language very quickly. They are going to public schools. They're having the American identity, and their parents might become resentful. They don't want them to lose their identity from their home country, and there is no contradiction or conflict. So we just need to sit down and let parents and children know that you can be proud Syrian American. There is nothing wrong about that. Or you can be American Muslim, and there is no contradiction there. So Alhamdulillah, Safe Spaces has been very well attended. I would say even the issue of suicide we tackled under a workshop. We called it 13 Reasons Why. What are the 13 reasons that a child might think about taking their own life, and why we can actually become the reasons for people not to think about suicide. So there are 13 reasons in our religion that we can stop people from thinking about that as the only exit. And so it's not only psychology, it's the beautiful combination of using our deen and merging it with the psychology. And then we have a culturally specific clinic that's once a month. We have the Ummah clinic here in Oregon, but there are many other culturally specific clinics throughout the country. So we see people once a month that they have a specific cultural and religious needs. We are in the process of having mobile crisis team. So if these people cannot come to our clinic, we go to them, and maybe establishing a hotline. So if somebody is calling, not necessarily calling 911 or calling the suicide prevention hotline, they can just call our hotline and we can respond to them in a way that maybe brings them more comfort than talking to somebody who doesn't share their cultural or religious experience. So that's another one. And subhanAllah, one that I'm very heavily focused on right now is reconciliation. We know in many conflicts, there are people who fought for and against certain ideology. Right now, I mean, there are the Arab Spring countries that are going through this. There is maybe Syria will go through this very soon. Maybe our brothers from the Rohingya community, and maybe when that war ends, inshallah, there might be reconciliation between them and the Burmese government. But also in our own backyards, there are people who, white supremacy and people who claim the name of the religion of Islam and operate under very dark, agenda like ISIS and other groups. But there are children who are confused in the middle. They can go to either of these, deviant groups because they feel that they belong there. These people also, they have their own trauma stories.
Right.
So at one point, when there is safety, when there is justice, when we have,
security, trust, predictability.
Exactly. Eventually, maybe we will listen to each other with the humanity and find a common ground, inshallah.
Yeah. And I know one of your books is on, the psychological explanation of why there is religious fundamentalism, extremism in groups like ISIS. So I want to save that for another show because that is a rich topic. That's one of the books that Dr. Omar has written about. We'll have lists of those books in the description of the show. So how can people get involved with Project Untangled if they'd like to? Is it just like go donate on the website, or is there other ways that people can support?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing to do is actually to believe in yourself and your loved ones and start the process of healing. SubhanAllah, I mean, sometimes we lose people very quickly and unpredictably, and then we go to their funerals and kiss them on the forehead and say, please forgive me now, when it's too late. So I encourage anybody who is interested in family bonding to do it immediately. Like, don't even wait until the show is over. Do it right now. Reach out to your loved ones, not only through text or Facebook message, but actually if you can, meet with them face to face and ask for forgiveness, even if you are the one who not at fault. But still, I mean, try your best to be خيرهم الذي يبدأ بالسلام. And the best among you is the one who says salam first. People can reject you, but between you and Allah, alhamdulillah, you tried your best to, try to rebuild bridges, because many of us are looking for that healing. The other person is looking for that healing too, most likely. And the other thing is to please establish safety. I mean, safety in our homes is something that's missing. There's lots of domestic violence and child abuse, and there is a dysfunctional dynamics, and there are people who are married for 25 years, but they are basically roommates. They live under a roof, but they don't share anything else. I want people to start bonding and paying attention and, showing affection and eventually, having a very loving relationship with their loved ones, because, we can have a smile and we can have an energy for everybody, but the minute we come to our home, we want to unwind and deflate and become grumpy, and we don't have any time for the people who matter most. So I wanted people to, inshallah, believe in the power of bonding, and they can do it through, alhamdulillah, lots of activities. I mean, these activities are cheap, or they are free of charge. Every single city, every single state, every country have many venues for people to sit down and do activities together as a family. We call it family time or quality time. If you can make it 30 minutes a day, maybe 45 minutes, maybe 1 hour, if you can. Technology free, face-to-face, eye-to-eye, heart-to-heart conversation with your loved ones. So that will start a journey of healing and building bridges and opening channels of communication. So that's the most important call to action, I would say. I would like to tell people.
Jazakallah khair, akramakumullah. And Dr. Omar, thank you so much for your time, and inshallah we'll have you on again soon. Akramakumullah, and blessings to you and your family and all that you do.
You too, Jazakallah khair, Brother Karim. It's a pleasure and honor. May Allah bless you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Coffee with Karim podcast. Don't forget to leave us a lovely review on iTunes and sponsor the show today at patreon.com. Links are in every description of every show.